Hello, everyone. My name is Ridge, and today we're looking at how Enver Gortash from Baldur's Gate 3 embodies Machiavellian principles found in the Prince, demonstrating good leadership prowess along with a few key downfalls that lead to his demise. So, for those of you who are not very familiar with Baldur's Gate or Machiavelli, here's a quick rundown. Machiavelli was a 15th to 16th century Italian diplomat, but also a famous philosopher. His most famous work, Il Principe, or The Prince, was a treatise on how one in the Renaissance era should consolidate their power with a mostly pragmatic approach. He preached the importance of knowing how to carry yourself, the qualities a person should appear to have, very important, and the willingness to forego morals if it meant keeping power. Now, I know it sounds a bit harsh by today's standards, but let's have a look at Baldur's Gate and Gortash. There are some spoilers ahead. Baldur's Gate is a game where players make their own character and venture through the Sword's Coast in order to cure a parasite in their head and take down the Absolute, a powerful being that is worshipped as a god by a growing cult. In Baldur's Gate 3, Gortash is one of three main antagonists, and through some powerful archaic magic, has control over the Absolute. This allows him to supplant himself as the Archduke of Baldur's Gate and effectively take control of the entire city. Okay, so right now you may be wondering at this point, what does an influential Renaissance diplomat and a fictional ruler of a city have to do with each other? Well, let's dive into how Gortash rules Baldur's Gate and make a few connections here. Just a little quick lore about Gortash. In his childhood, he was sold off by his parents to a literal devil, and after serving him for an indiscriminate amount of time, he was left tattered and physically broken. So that really shows us why he has this overwhelming ambition that we see play out throughout the entire. I'd like to go over what he did right first. And when I say right, I don't mean morally at all, but in what he did right to keep his power. Before he's even given the title of Archduke, he amasses a collection of completely loyal and heavily armored automatons named the Steel Watch or the Steel Watchers. From flame-throwing variants to those who wield crossbows, the behemoth soldiers ensure that Gortash is protected at all times. So, besides his personal set of bodyguards, Gortash himself is also quite the capable individual. I'll exclude the more magical and superfluous abilities he has, but as a character, he's charismatic, straightforward, and intelligent. This can be seen in the dialogue with him when he uses guile to sway those at his coronation, when he does not outright lie to the protagonist despite their opposite positions in the main conflict of the story, and how he elegantly sets forth a plan that, if it was not disturbed by the player, would come to fruition. In Chapter 18 of The Prince, it talks about how one must possess the spirit of the lion and the fox, as the mighty lion can fend off threats, but it cannot traverse traps, with the fox being the opposite. Applying it to Gortash, he does not immediately threaten or become adversarial with the protagonist, but rather tries to strike a deal that would stand to benefit them both. He explains that there may not be a need for conflict and that together they can control the Absolute and take over the world. A mighty proposition, for sure. With his expert cunning in not only political dealings, but with the player, and his Steel Watch providing bountiful protection, Gortash truly shows that he has the defense and the wit to be a successful ruler. After the initial conversation with Gortash, there are two main paths the player can take, either siding with Gortash or against him. When siding against him, the player can interact with the main way he demonstrates the use of fear. Throughout exploring the lower city part of Baldur's Gate, you can go into his workshop and explore the inner workings of his Steel Watch production. Here, he does some morally questionable things, as we can see has many laborers working tirelessly under supervision of his taskmasters. Upon further investigation, they are all also wearing odd devices around their neck, and when you speak to them after dispatching their taskmasters, you learn that they are working out of fear that Gortash will kill their imprisoned families if they do not concede to him. Oh, and the devices around their necks are bomb collars. Needless to say, Gortash is not a great person for doing this, but he effectively uses the Machiavellian principle of wielding fear to force compliance. The well-known question, is it better to be feared or loved, derives itself from the prince, and here Gortash quite obviously aligns himself with the former. Machiavelli states that it's hard to get love and fear within one person, and that being feared is the safer alternative of the two. Fear preserves you by a dread of punishment, which never fails. The Gondians, the formal name for the small ingenious workers, will never fail to meet Gortash's expectations strictly out of fear. However, this fear sours into hatred just as Machiavelli predicts. If the protagonist chooses to dispatch of the taskmasters and help the Gondians, the first order on their agenda is to save their loved ones being held captive, with a close second being to blow up the workshop they're being contained in. As soon as the looming threat of their family's safety is resolved, the Gondians immediately rebel, for Gortash did not care to foster any love within them. Gortash also violated Machiavelli's precept of using fear with limitation, overstepping the line of what would cause fear and what would incite rebellion. A proper application of the idea could have avoided such an outcome, perhaps leading to a more successful rule, but I doubt it. With the protagonist's help, the Gondians can input the code needed to detonate the factory, and with the lion's share of Gortash's protection gone, he's vulnerable to attack. Upon confronting him, he'll waste no time fighting you alongside his non-mechanical militia, regardless if you defied him in the factory or if you broke your promise. Despite demonstrating great martial prowess, he succumbs to the player and their scornful blade. But what if you stuck with him all the way through and allowed his persuasion to tempt your power-hungry side? Even if you decide to ignore his morally questionable methods in procuring power, you'll still find faults in his character that lead to a craven leader. Agreeing to his proposal will have you slay Orn, the last antagonist of the game. And after battling fiercely, while he sits on his comfy throne, he tests your character by threatening you to hand over the stones that can control the Absolute. If you relinquish the stones, he finds you unworthy of standing alongside him in world domination. However, if you refuse his request for the stones, he rejoices in your apparent shrewdness and accompanies you on your journey to the home of the Absolute. He who conquers does not want doubtful friends who will not aid him in the time of trial. Gortash uses this principle, and it seems almost detrimental to the New Alliance at first, but it stands to prove a point. If they are to rule the world, one would need to be headstrong and confident, putting themselves first among friends. By staying resolute, the player starts to embrace Machiavellian principles found in Chapter 21 of The Prince on how one should manage their own renown. Alongside Gortash, both of them show that their renown should not be ceded to each other, even out of amnesty, and showing that they are truly equal in this exchange. Also, the entire deal itself avails to another Machiavellian principle, that is to appear virtuous while being able to act immorally if necessary. Going along with Gortash's plan ultimately does make the game easier for the player, but it also allows Gortash to eliminate a rivaling power. His willingness to break the agreement also shows that he does not feed into relationships that will not benefit his ideal future. He has a relatively minor role on the journey itself, but it is in the confrontation with the Absolute that we see his true colors. Together, the player and Gortash attempt to control the Absolute, and regardless of your successes, if failure seems imminent, Gortash will attempt to yield all 3 stones from you and control the Absolute himself. This craven move not only violates the previously mentioned principle, but also shows that he himself was not the most loyal to the player, perhaps showing that he did not want to fall subject to the player if they could somehow wield the Absolute's power. It also had the unintentional outcome of imploding his brain. This brash use of power is due to his lack of trust and care, and as with such actions, he unknowingly signed off on his own regicide. Throughout our interactions with Gortash in Baldur's Gate 3, we can see that while he possesses some of the very crucial traits to be a successful ruler, such as guile and a willingness to stay pragmatic and opportunistic, he has yet to understand the Machiavellian precepts found in The Prince in full. And through his folly, he fails in a few key areas that truly capped out his ability to rule and ultimately led to his demise. Very quickly, I'll flash my sources up on the screen, but there will also be a link to my works cited below. Thank you very much for watching and have a great weekend. Thank you.